Most people who failed to build what they were capable of building did not fail because the idea was wrong. They did not fail because the timing was off. They did not fail because they lacked the ability or the resources or the determination. They failed because they told someone, not a competitor, not an enemy, someone they trusted. Someone who loved them and meant well, and whose response to hearing the plan, delivered with the best of intentions, quietly killed the thing before it had any chance to live. I have watched this happen more times than I can count, and I have felt it happen to me personally in the early years when I was still learning which things to protect and which things to share. The specific mechanism by which a trusted person, a spouse, a close friend, a mentor you respect, destroys your plan without ever intending to is the most dangerous thing I know about building. And nobody talks about it because naming it feels like an accusation of people you love. I am going to name it anyway. And then I am going to give you the specific practice that protects what you are building from every source of damage, intended or not. I am Henry Ford. I built the Ford Motor Company from nothing. I changed how the world manufactures and moves. I paid my workers more than anyone thought was wise, and made more money for doing it. I did not accomplish any of this alone. I had partners, workers, suppliers, investors, and a wife who supported me through things that most men would not have stayed standing through. I am not describing silence as a way of cutting people out of your life or treating the people you love as threats. I am describing a specific practice of protecting the living thing that an unbuilt plan is, until it is strong enough to survive contact with other people's reactions to it. A plan that has not yet been built is not a fact. It is a living intention, and living intentions are fragile in ways that are different from the fragility of objects. You cannot damage a plan by dropping it. You can damage it by exposing it to doubt before it is ready to withstand doubt. You can damage it by exposing it to enthusiasm that peaks and then fades. You can damage it by exposing it to the well-meaning questions of people who love you, but whose frame of reference for what is possible for you was established before you decided to expand it. By the end of this message, you will understand the specific ways that sharing a plan too early damages it, and the specific people through whom it is most often damaged. You will understand the difference between the protection of silence and the isolation of fear, and you will have a clear practice for what to share, when to share it, with whom, and in what form, so that the things you are building receive the protection they need while you are building them, and the full weight of their arrival when they are complete. Listen to this every day. The man who hears it once learns something. The man who hears it daily changes how he moves. This is the part that makes people uncomfortable when I say it. So I will say it plainly, and then explain it fully, and let you decide whether I am right. The person you most want to tell your plan to is almost always the person whose response to hearing it poses the greatest risk to the plan surviving. Not because that person is bad, not because they wish you harm, because the people you most want to tell are the people you are closest to, and the people you are closest to have the most deeply established model of who you currently are. They love you as you are. And when you describe who you are going to become, the description conflicts with the model they have held and built and depended on. Their reaction to the conflict is not malicious, it is honest. And the honesty arrives in the form of doubt, of caution, of gentle questions about whether you have thought through the risks. The questions are not wrong questions. The caution is not wrong caution. But delivered at the moment when a plan is most alive and most fragile, before it has any evidence or any results or any external validation behind it, those honest questions can do something that no enemy's opposition could do. They can make you doubt the plan in the same moment you need to be most certain of it. There is a specific psychological mechanism here that I want to describe carefully. When someone you trust and love expresses doubt about something you have not yet built, you do not experience it as their doubt. You experience it as information. Because you trust them, their reaction carries weight that a stranger's reaction would not. And the weight of their doubt, absorbed into your own assessment of the plan, changes the internal experience of it. The plan that felt alive and real 5 minutes ago now feels slightly more uncertain, slightly more speculative, The certainty that was going to drive the work has been diluted by the worry of someone who loves you. This is not dramatic. It is quiet. You still intend to pursue the plan. You still believe in it. But the edge is slightly softer than it was before the conversation. And for an unbuilt thing that has not yet generated its own evidence, that edge is everything. The early days of building anything are held together almost entirely by the specific quality of internal certainty that the builder brings to it. Dilute the certainty before the building has produced any external validation, and you have removed the structural support that the early stages depend on. This is why I say the person you most want to tell is the most dangerous. Not because they will intend to damage the plan, because their honest human response to an unproven claim will, without any malice, remove something the claim cannot yet afford to lose. There is a specific morning from the years before the Ford Motor Company existed that I do not often discuss because it touches something personal in a way that most public accounts of building prefer to avoid. My wife Clara understood me better than anyone in my life. She was not a passive observer of my work. She was actively supportive in a way that most men in my position did not have access to. And I have said publicly many times that without her steady belief in what I was doing, the early years would have been much harder to sustain. But there was a morning, several years before the company was established, when I made the mistake of describing a specific vision to her in a level of detail that the vision had not yet earned. Not the general direction. I had described that and she had received it with the support I am describing, but a specific target, a specific level of scale, a specific claim about what I believed was possible and by when. Clara's response was not hostile. It was careful. She asked whether I had thought through the resources that scale would require. She asked whether the men I would need to hire would be available and willing. She asked whether the timeline was realistic given what the first two companies had produced and how long they had taken. Every question was a reasonable question asked by a person who cared deeply about what happened to me. And for 3 days after that conversation, I felt something in the plan that I had not felt before the conversation, a specific heaviness, not doubt exactly, the awareness of doubt, the awareness that someone I trusted had received the plan and found it worth questioning in detail. Her questions lived in my mind alongside the plan, and the questions were intelligent enough that I could not dismiss them. I had to carry them. I worked through the questions. I arrived at answers that satisfied me. But the 3 days of carrying the questions cost me something that I would not have paid if I had kept the specific detail of the plan to myself until I had evidence to stand behind it. The general direction was, and remained, something Clara knew and supported. But from that morning forward, the specific targets and the specific timelines remained inside the work until the work itself had produced the evidence that would make them something to describe rather than something to protect. And that discipline, which I arrived at through the discomfort of that specific experience, changed how I moved for every building project that followed. I am telling you this not to suggest that Clara was wrong to respond as she did. She was right. The questions were good ones. The issue was the timing of the exposure, not the quality of the response. A plan strong enough to survive those questions would be a plan with evidence behind it. And a plan with evidence behind it does not need protection. It can handle the questions. The plan I described that morning had no evidence yet. It could not handle the questions without cost. Protect the plan until it can handle the questions. That is what the experience with Clara taught me. I want to go deeper on the mechanism here, because it is the thing that makes this specific danger so hard to see. When an enemy opposes your plan, the opposition is identifiable. You know it is opposition. You can evaluate the specific objections on their merits, dismiss the ones that are motivated by competitive interest, and address the ones that are genuinely useful. The opposition helps clarify the plan in a specific way because the source is clearly external. When someone who loves you expresses doubt, the doubt does not arrive as opposition. It arrives as concern, as care. As the reasonable voice of someone who wants you to succeed and is worried that the specific plan you have described carries risks you may not have fully considered. And because it arrives as care rather than opposition, you cannot dismiss it as competitive interest. You cannot label it as hostile. and set it aside. You have to take it seriously because the person expressing it is someone whose judgment you value and whose interest in your well-being is genuine. This is what I mean when I say good intentions are the most effective plan killers. A motivated enemy cannot get inside your confidence the way a concerned friend can. The enemy's doubt is external and identifiable. The friend's doubt enters through the crack that trust has opened and becomes indistinguishable from your own doubt. You can no longer tell the difference between your genuine assessment of the plan and the assessment your friend introduced through their concern. Harvey Firestone described this to me once in terms that I found precise. He said that the most damaging form of external input on an early plan is not opposition but calibration. When an enemy opposes, you know to recalibrate your confidence upward to compensate for their bias. When a friend calibrates your expectations downward from a position of genuine concern, you absorb the calibration without applying any correction factor, because the concern is real and the advice is given without agenda. The result is that the friend's calibration of your expectations is more powerful than the enemy's opposition, precisely because the friend's calibration is trusted. And a downward calibration of expectations at the moment when the plan needs maximum forward momentum is exactly the kind of invisible damage that prevents things from being built by people who were entirely capable of building them. Not everyone in your life poses the same risk to an early plan. The risk is specific and varies by the nature of the relationship and the specific way that person processes new information. I want to describe the 4 types that pose the most consistent risk, so you can identify who in your life falls into each category. The first type is the worrier. This is the person who loves you deeply and whose response to any new information about what you are planning runs immediately to what could go wrong. The worrier is not pessimistic by character. They are careful. They have seen enough difficulty in life to know that things do not always work out, and they do not want that difficulty to reach you. When they hear your plan, their mind goes to the risks before it goes to the possibilities. Their questions are about failure modes and contingencies and what you will do if the worst happens. These are not bad questions. But delivered before you have any evidence to stand behind, they shift your own internal landscape from possibility to risk management, which is exactly the wrong landscape for the early stages of building. The second type is the well-meaning discourager. This is the person who genuinely believes that protecting you from disappointment is an act of love. They have seen people they care about try things and fail, and they have experienced the secondary pain of watching that happen. So when you describe what you are going to build, something in them wants to slow you down, not to stop you, but to protect you from the disappointment they fear is coming. Their discouragement is the most sincere form of care, and it is among the most damaging things an early plan can encounter. The third type is the enthusiast, whose enthusiasm peaks and fades. This one is counterintuitive. Most people think that enthusiastic support is the opposite of a plan killer. In fact, premature enthusiastic support can be as damaging as premature doubt, for a specific reason. When someone responds to your plan with high energy and excitement and confirms your direction with enthusiasm, the mind experiences that response as a form of social validation that substitutes for actual progress. The feeling of being supported and believed in produces something that feels like momentum, but is not. It is borrowed momentum. And borrowed momentum, like borrowed money, has to be repaid when the reality of the building work arrives in its actual unglamorous form. The fourth type is the reframer. This is the person who, when they hear what you want to build, responds with what they think you should want to build instead, not with opposition, with an alternative. They take your plan and redirect it towards something they find more reasonable, more achievable, more consistent with their model of what you are capable of. The reframer is not trying to diminish your plan. They are trying to help you succeed at something, just not necessarily the thing you described. And the specific cost is that their alternative, delivered by someone whose opinion you value, introduces a competing destination into your internal landscape, where before you had one direction, now you have two. And maintaining direction in the early stages of building requires the absence of competing destinations. Know which of these 4 types are present in your close circle, not to remove them from your life, to know whose ears your early plans are not yet meant for. In the years after the Ford Motor Company was established and growing, I was involved in a significant negotiation for a supply arrangement that was important to our production capacity. The other party was a man of real experience and real resources, someone who understood the leverage points in the arrangement and who had a clear sense of what he wanted from it. Before the negotiation began, I made a deliberate decision. I told no one outside of the smallest necessary circle what our maximum acceptable terms were, not our preferred terms, our maximum, the point at which we would walk away. I kept this entirely to myself and to one trusted colleague who needed to know it in order to participate effectively in the discussion. The other party came into the negotiation with a specific model of what we would accept. I could see it in how he structured his opening. He had clearly spoken to people who knew our situation and formed a view of where our ceiling was. His opening position was calibrated to that view. The view was wrong, not because I had deceived anyone, because I had told no one. The model he had been given was built from inference and assumption, rather than from any statement I had made. And inference and assumption had placed our ceiling lower than it actually was. We concluded the negotiation at terms that were significantly better than what his opening had anticipated, not because I was more skilled at the mechanics of negotiating, because I had walked in with a real position that no one had been able to read in advance. His preparation had been based on a model of what I would accept. The model was wrong, and the wrong model gave me an advantage that no amount of negotiating skill could have produced if the correct model had been available to him beforehand. This was not the first time I had observed this advantage, but it was the clearest and most concrete example I experienced personally of the specific way that silence functions as a negotiating asset. The man whose position cannot be read walks into every transaction from a place of genuine strength, not performed strength, real strength, because the other party cannot calibrate their approach to reach it. Every time you describe your plans, your intentions, your targets, your timelines, to people who may at some point be on the opposite side of a transaction from you, you are handing them information they will use, not necessarily consciously, not necessarily with any adversarial intent, but they will update their model of you with what you describe. And the model they hold of you is what determines their approach to every future interaction. Keep your plans private, and every interaction begins with the other party operating from inference rather than information. And inference is almost always wrong. There is something about the act of speaking a plan aloud that most people have not examined, and the thing that happens is not what most people expect. When a plan lives inside you, it is alive, it moves, it adjusts, it responds to new information. You think about it differently on different days, as new things arrive, and as the pieces shift in relation to each other. It is a living system that is continuously updating itself in response to what you learn and what you experience. When you speak a plan aloud, something changes. The speaking forces a specific crystallization. You have to put the plan into words, which means choosing one specific form for something that was fluid. The words fix the plan in a way that the internal version was not fixed. And once the plan has been given a specific verbal form and delivered to another person, it exists in the world in that specific form. It has been committed to an external record that is now partially outside your control. The cost of this crystallization is flexibility. The plan that was still adjusting, still responding, still incorporating new information, has been given a shape that it now has to maintain, at least in relation to the person who heard it. If the plan changes significantly after being spoken, you are now either managing the change with the person who heard the original version, which takes time and energy, or you are carrying 2 versions of the plan, the spoken one and the real one, which is its own kind of weight. This is one of the ways that telling the plan too early makes the plan worse, not by introducing doubt. By prematurely fixing a form that needed more time to find its best shape. The unspoken plan is still free to become what the evidence and the building process determine it should be. The spoken plan has already committed to a specific form that complicates every subsequent evolution. I saw this in my own work most clearly in the years of developing what became the assembly line. The concept went through many iterations before it became what it was. Each iteration was a significant departure from the previous one. If I had described the concept publicly at any point in those iterations, I would have been managing the gap between the current version and the spoken version throughout the development. The freedom to let the concept find its best form without managing an external description of its previous forms was part of what allowed it to become what it eventually became. Let the plan find its shape in private. Speak it only when its shape is stable enough that subsequent changes will be refinements rather than fundamental revisions. The difference between refinements and fundamental revisions is the difference between a plan that can be spoken of and a plan that is still becoming what it needs to be. There was a man named Philip who I knew in the early years of the automobile industry. Philip had a genuine opportunity. He had identified a supply relationship that would have given a small manufacturer a significant cost advantage in a specific component that nearly every automobile company needed at the time. The relationship was real and available, and the terms Philip had been offered were better than anything available through normal channels. Philip was excited. He told a close friend who was also involved in manufacturing, not a competitor. Someone in a different part of the industry who Philip trusted completely, and who Philip thought might benefit from knowing about the opportunity. The friend did not act against Philip in any way that could be described as betrayal. The friend simply mentioned, in a conversation with his own contacts, that there was a good supply opportunity in a specific component area, not identifying Philip by name, not describing the specific terms. Just sharing, as people do, a piece of useful information in the context of a conversation where it seemed relevant. Within 3 weeks, 2 other manufacturers had found the supplier. The terms that had been available to Philip alone, before anyone else knew about them, were now being negotiated by multiple parties simultaneously. The advantage that had been Philip's specifically because he alone knew about it dissolved in the presence of competition. The terms he was offered when the negotiation concluded were significantly less favorable than what he had originally been offered when he was the only one asking. Philip had not told a competitor. He had told a friend. The friend had not acted with any malice. The friend had simply treated the information the way most people treat information, as something that can be shared in appropriate contexts with appropriate people. And the sharing, completely innocent in intent, had removed the specific advantage that the information carried precisely because it was not widely known. This is the other dimension of keeping plans private that goes beyond the psychological protection I described earlier. Some opportunities, some advantages, some pieces of information have a specific value that is entirely dependent on the fact that few people know about them. The moment that changes, the value changes. Sometimes it disappears entirely. The private plan is not just protected from emotional damage, it is protected from the natural human tendency to treat information as something that benefits from being shared. Most information does benefit from sharing. Information that carries value specifically because it is not widely known is destroyed by sharing. And the distinction between the two types is not always obvious in the moment of a conversation with a trusted person. When in doubt, protect. You can always share later. You cannot unshare what has already been shared. Here is the first exercise. It surfaces something most people have never looked at directly. Draw 2 columns on a piece of paper. At the top of the left column, write, "Things I have described about my plans." At the top of the right column, write, "What those descriptions have produced." Now go through the most significant things you are currently building or have tried to build in the past 2 years. For each one, write in the left column the main things you described to other people, and approximately when in the development of the project you described them. In the right column, write honestly what happened in the days and weeks following each description. Did the work advance faster or slower? Did the internal certainty you felt about the project increase or decrease? Did the description produce any practical resource, information, or support that the project specifically needed? Or did it produce primarily reactions, questions, and social engagement that felt valuable but that did not directly advance the building? This exercise is not designed to make you feel bad about past behavior. It is designed to give you a concrete, specific account of the relationship between what you shared and what happened to the projects after you shared it. Most people discover, when they do this honestly, that a significant portion of their describing produced social experiences without advancing the building, and that several significant moments of lost energy or momentum followed moments of premature description. The map you create is not a universal prescription for what to share and what to protect forever. It is a personal diagnostic. It shows you your own specific pattern of when description has served the project and when it has cost it. Use the pattern to make more deliberate choices about what you share going forward. I want to address a confusion that arises almost every time I describe this practice, because the confusion is important to clear up, and it prevents people from applying the practice correctly. Protecting a plan from premature exposure is not the same thing as living in fear of what people will think. They look similar from the outside. Both involve keeping quiet about what you are doing, but they come from completely different places internally, and they produce completely different results. The person who keeps quiet from fear is still dominated by other people's opinions. They are silent because they are afraid of the reaction, afraid of the doubt, afraid of the judgment. The silence is organized around managing the fear of external response, and that fear is still present inside the building process, shaping every decision, every day, whether or not anyone else can see it. The person who keeps quiet from discipline is not afraid of the reaction. They know what they are building, they know why, and they have made a deliberate choice to protect the building process from external input until the building has progressed to a stage where external input is useful rather than costly. The silence is organized around the building. The external world is simply not the right audience yet. The practical test for which kind you are practicing is this. If your plan were known and the people around you responded with doubt, would it change your direction? If yes, you are protecting from fear, because the doubt's ability to change your direction reveals that the certainty behind the plan is dependent on other people's responses to it. If no, if you know what you are building, and the doubt would be noted and set aside without cost, then you are protecting from discipline. The plan is strong enough to survive the exposure. You are simply choosing not to expose it yet, because the exposure serves no useful purpose at this stage. Build to the point where the doubt would not change your direction. Then the exposure is safe. The discipline of silence is what gets you to that point. It protects the plan during the period when it would be vulnerable to doubt, so that by the time the exposure happens, the plan is strong enough to handle it without cost. I want to describe what happens over time when the practice of protecting plans until they are ready to be shared becomes consistent, because the short-term experience of the practice is the restraint of not sharing. The long-term experience is something different. Over time, the man who consistently protects his plans and then delivers them develops a specific relationship with the world around him. The world knows what he has done. The world does not know what he is planning to do next. And that asymmetry, where the past is known and the future is opaque, creates a specific quality of attention. The man who announces his plans constantly trains the world around him to receive his statements as predictions. Predictions that may or may not come true. When he speaks about what is coming, people mentally file it as a prediction and assign it a probability based on his track record of prediction accuracy. If the track record is mixed, the probability assigned is lower than the certainty with which he delivered the prediction. His forward statements are always being discounted in real time by the listener's assessment of his delivery history. The man who never announces his plans trains the world to receive his statements as reports. When he speaks, he is describing something that exists, not something that might exist. And reports carry a completely different weight than predictions. Reports do not need a discount applied because they are not predictions. They are observations of what is already real. Over years, the accumulation of the world, treating your statements as reports rather than predictions, produces a position that is difficult to describe accurately without experiencing it. When you speak, people believe you immediately, without requiring additional verification, because every prior statement you have made in their experience has been a report of something real, rather than a prediction of something that might become real. That position, the position of a man whose words are automatically believed, is worth more in every transaction, every negotiation, every relationship you enter, than almost any specific resource or advantage you could name. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be claimed. It can only be built by the consistent behavior of delivering before describing, over enough time that the behavior becomes the expectation the world holds of you. Silence does not just protect the plan. Over time, it builds the position from which everything you say carries its full weight. Here is the second exercise. It is a specific practice that creates the habit of protection without requiring that you never speak about your work at all. For 30 days, apply a single filter to every potential description of a plan before you deliver it. The filter is one question, asked in the moment before you speak. Does this person need this information to help me build the thing, or do I want them to know it for a different reason? If the answer is that they need the information to participate in the building, speak. Suppliers, partners, workers, people with specific roles in the execution need what they need in order to execute. Give them exactly what they need. If the answer is that you want them to know it for a different reason, for the social experience of sharing, for the validation of their response, for the feeling of being a person with a plan who is moving towards something real, pause, not permanently, but long enough to ask a second question. What specifically could be lost if I describe this now? Name the specific risk, not in a paranoid way. Honestly, could this person's doubt reduce my certainty at a moment when I need the certainty intact? Could this information reach someone whose model of my plans will affect how they deal with me in a transaction? Could the speaking of this plan prematurely fix a form that still needs freedom to find its best shape? Could the response, however well-intentioned, consume energy that belongs in the building? If you name a specific risk that is real, protect the plan for now. If you name no specific risk, share if you wish. The discipline is not about universal silence. It is about deliberate awareness of what each potential description costs and produces. 30 days of applying that filter consistently will change your default behavior around sharing in a way that 30 days of general intention to be more careful will not. The filter question creates a micro-decision before every potential sharing. And the micro-decision creates the habit of protection that, once established, runs automatically without requiring the filter to be applied consciously. Here is the thing I have been building toward throughout this entire message, and I want to state it plainly. When you protect a plan from premature exposure, you are not protecting the idea. Ideas are not fragile. Ideas can be spoken of freely without significant cost. You are not protecting the strategy. Strategies can be shared when the time is right and when the people receiving them have a legitimate role in executing them. What you are protecting is the internal certainty that drives the building, the specific quality of conviction that makes it possible to take the next step when there is no external evidence yet that the step is correct. That conviction is the only fuel the early stages of building run on. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be generated from outside. It comes from inside the person who is building, and it is maintained or eroded by what you expose it to before the building has produced enough external evidence to sustain itself on that evidence alone. The early plan needs that conviction the way a small fire needs protection from wind. The fire is real. The fire has heat and light and the capacity to become something much larger. But in its early state, before it has built up enough heat and mass to sustain itself in adverse conditions, a wind that would be irrelevant to a larger fire can extinguish it entirely. The protection is not permanent. It is appropriate to the stage. When the fire is large enough, the wind is no longer a threat. It may even help. The plan needs the same protection at the same stage, not forever, not out of fear that it will never be strong enough to survive exposure, but for the specific period of early building when the only thing keeping it moving is the internal certainty of the person building it, and that certainty is not yet supported by enough external evidence to withstand the erosion that premature doubt, even well-intentioned doubt, produces. Build the fire first. Protect it from the wind while it is small. When it is large enough to handle the wind, speak of it freely. Describe it fully. invite the response. At that stage, the response can no longer extinguish it. At that stage, the doubt, if it comes, will refine the fire rather than threatening to end it. That is the practice. That is what never telling your plans in the specific sense I am describing actually means, not permanent silence. The specific protection of a living thing during the period when it is most vulnerable to being extinguished by contact with the outside world. I have described extensively why you should not share your plans prematurely. I want to spend some time on what to say instead, because the practical question of how to navigate conversations when people ask about your direction is a real one, and it deserves a real answer. The protection I am describing is not about refusing to communicate. It is about the distinction between describing a direction and committing to a specific outcome with an implied timeline. Those two things feel similar in conversation, but they are completely different in terms of what they expose and what they cost. You can tell someone you are working on improving a specific part of your operation without telling them what improvement you expect to achieve or when. You can tell someone you see a significant opportunity in a specific area without telling them exactly what position you intend to take. You can tell someone you are building towards something larger than what currently exists without describing the specific shape of the larger thing. The direction is general enough to be honest without being specific enough to create the debt I have been describing. The person you are speaking with receives a true answer. They understand something real about where you are pointing, but they do not receive the specific prediction against which any future result will be measured. Here is the specific language I have found most useful in those conversations. When someone asks what you are working on, say, "I am focused on making progress in a specific area, and I will show you what has come from it when there is something real to show." That is a complete and honest answer. It describes your state of focus, implies that something is developing, and commits to a future conversation at the appropriate time, which is when the result exists. When someone asks about your timeline, the honest answer is almost always that the timeline depends on the quality of what is being built, not on a date that serves anyone's planning needs. You can say, "I will know the timing when the work tells me." That is true. Timelines for early-stage building are genuinely unknown because they depend on what is discovered in the process of building. Refusing to commit to a false precision is not evasion, it is accuracy. When someone asks whether something you are working on is going well, resist the binary of yes or no. The honest answer about most serious building projects in their early stages is that some things are progressing and some things are presenting challenges and that the overall direction remains correct. That answer does not require you to describe what specifically is progressing or what specifically is challenging. It describes the state of the work truthfully without handing over the specific map of the project. This kind of language feels evasive to people who are accustomed to the specific, optimistic, future-committed declarations that most ambitious people use when talking about what they are building. But it is not evasive. It is precise. It describes the reality of building rather than the performance of building. And over time, the people who know you learn that when you say something is progressing, it is progressing. When you say there is something real to show, there will be something real to show. The language trains the people around you to take your words seriously because your words have always been accurate rather than aspirational. That training, slow as it is to build, is the foundation of every significant relationship and transaction in your professional life. The man whose words can be taken literally, because his words have always been taken from the literal, commands a kind of authority in conversation that no amount of confident prediction-making can approach. And the path to that authority runs through the specific discipline of describing only what you can verify and protecting everything else until it can be verified. I have spent most of this message describing who not to tell and when not to tell them. I want to spend a moment on the other side because the discipline is not absolute silence with everyone forever. There is a category of person worth telling and a specific time that is right for telling them. The person worth telling is someone whose specific knowledge, capability, resource, or role is directly required for the building, not someone who might be able to help in a general way. Someone who has something specific that the project needs and cannot proceed without. That person needs to know what you are building, because their participation requires it. Give them exactly and only what their participation requires. Not the full vision, not the timelines, not the scale you expect to reach. The specific information their specific role requires in order to execute. The time worth telling is when the project has produced enough real progress that the conversation is a description of something that exists rather than a prediction of something that might, not the final completion. The point at which the direction is clear and the evidence is real enough that the description is grounded in verifiable reality rather than in intention alone. At that point, the conversation is not a request for validation, it is a report, and reports carry a completely different weight than requests for validation, because reports are observations of fact rather than appeals for belief. The person receiving the report does not need to decide whether to believe you. They can verify what you are describing. Their response is grounded in what exists rather than in their hopes or doubts about what might exist. And the conversation that follows, the conversation you have been protecting the plan in order to eventually have, is a completely different kind of conversation, substantive, specific, grounded in reality. Moving forward from a shared understanding of what already is, rather than a shared hope about what might be. Build toward that conversation. Every day of protecting the plan in silence is a day of building toward the moment when the description is a report rather than a prediction. That moment, when it arrives, makes every day of silence that preceded it make sense. I want to be honest about one genuine cost of this practice that I have not yet named, because leaving it out would make the description incomplete. Practicing the discipline of silence about your plans means spending a significant portion of your building time in a state of relative isolation about the most important thing you are doing. The people closest to you do not fully know what is occupying your most serious attention. The people whose opinions matter most to you cannot offer their perspective on the specific choices you are making. You are, in the specific sense of this practice, alone with the thing you are building during the period when it most needs to be built. This is not free. There is a real human cost to carrying something significant without being able to describe it to the people you love. There are mornings when the problem is harder than your current thinking can solve, and the absence of someone to think through it with is felt as a genuine lack. There are moments of doubt when the plan is not advancing the way it should be, and the absence of a trusted voice saying this is normal, keep going, is noticed. I have felt those costs. I am not pretending they are small. The loneliness of the protected plan is real, and it is part of what you are paying to build in silence. What makes it worth paying is what the silence produces. The result that arrives without prior expectation. The surprise that carries its full weight. The negotiating position that no one can anticipate. The internal certainty that was never diluted by premature exposure to doubt. The reputation built by a man whose words always describe what is real rather than what he hopes will become real. Those things, accumulated over years of building in silence, are worth the specific loneliness the silence costs. Not because loneliness is good, because what it produces is genuinely better than what the alternative produces. And knowing that clearly, understanding the full transaction, is what makes it possible to sustain the discipline through the hard mornings when the isolation is felt most sharply. Pay the cost with open eyes. Know what you are paying for, and do not mistake the discomfort of the discipline for evidence that the discipline is wrong. I want to close with something honest about the difficulty of this practice, because describing it as simply the right thing to do without acknowledging why it is hard to do is not useful. The pull to share what you are building is not weakness. It is human. The desire to be known as a person with direction, with ambition, with a vision that is worth having, is a real and legitimate desire. The desire to share excitement with the people you love, to let them into the thing that is alive in you, is not a character flaw. It is a normal and healthy impulse. The discipline of protecting plans is not about suppressing those impulses. It is about channeling them in a direction that serves the building rather than costs it. The excitement you feel about what you are building, the desire to be known for the direction you have chosen, the wish to share the alive thing with people you love, all of that is available to you without cost. When the building has produced enough that the sharing describes a result rather than a prediction. The man who waits until the delivery to describe does not deny himself the experience of sharing. He changes the timing. He shares the thing itself rather than the plan for the thing. And the sharing of a thing that exists, delivered to people who had not known it was coming, produces a richer experience of exactly what the premature sharing was trying to produce. Not the validation of a plan that might become real, the recognition of a thing that already is. Wait for that moment. Protect the plan until it produces it. The protection is temporary. The result is permanent. Listen to this again tomorrow. The part of it that matters most to what you are currently building will be clearer the second time than the first. That is how this kind of practice works. The words stay the same. Your position in relation to them deepens as the building progresses. Never tell them what you are building. Show them what you built.